Let's talk some chess. So we're halfway through 2023 and we have a candidate for Move of the Year. This game was played a couple of days ago in the SuperUnited Rapid Croatia tournament. Player with the white pieces, who we all know, is Magnus Carlsen. Player with the black pieces, also a familiar face, Jan Duda. And this was a rapid game, so let's kick it off. We have D4 by Magnus, knight to F6 by Duda, and C4 by Magnus. Very standard stuff so far. E6 by Duda, knight to F3 by Magnus, and here D5 by Duda, transposing into the Queen's Gambit declined, where there's a sort of hanging pawn on C4. Magnus ignores the pawn for now, playing G3, preparing to fianchetto his light squared bishop, and here Duda accepts the sacrifice, and now we do have sort of a Queen's Gambit-y start to the game. Magnus continues as planned with bishop to G2, and now Duda plays C5, doubling up, well, not doubling up, I guess you don't really double up pawns, but getting these pawns together on the queen side. The engine here prefers you to play bishop to b4 with check, developing a piece with tempo. Then after Magnus blocks the bishop, you can play a5, cementing your bishop on b4. And now if Magnus trades, you have these two very nice pawns that are really cramping Magnus's style on the queen side. So that's what the engine prefers, but Duda's move is fine as well. He plays c5, and now Magnus, instead of sort of capturing back, just castles and tucks his king to safety. And king safety, as in many games that I talk about, is a very important theme of this game. So Magnus's king is safe, Duda's king is still on e8, which will obviously become important as the game progresses. Here Duda plays knight to c6. This comes with an attack on the d4 pawn, which is now attacked thrice by the queen, knight, and pawn. And Magnus here defends it sort of indirectly by playing queen to a4, pinning the knight to the king. Duda breaks the pin with bishop to d7, and now Magnus just picks up the pawn on c4. So nice maneuver, getting the queen out and forking sort of a pin, and then also forking the pawn on c4. Now Duda captures the pawn on d4, and Magnus just takes back with the knight on d4. And this is a really nice series of moves for Magnus. He gave up a pawn, but slowly won it back, and in the process was able to castle kingside, fianchetto his bishop, and get his queen and knight on very good squares. So here Duda brings his rook to c8, which is also a great move, putting the rook on an open file. Now if the knight moves, you have a discovered attack from the rook to the queen, and Magnus ignores it for now and just plays knight to b3. We have knight captures on d4, queen captures on d4, and bishop to c5. A wonderful developing move, obviously developing with tempo and attacking the queen. The queen cannot capture back because the rook is guarding the bishop on c5. So here the queen just comes to h5. And this is going to be a really important sort of piece in the position later on. I was a little bit surprised to see this queen all the way on the h file, but Magnus knows best. So we'll see how that plays out as the game develops. Duda brings his bishop to c6, and you can sort of already see in this position, Duda's king is still in the middle of the board, and he can castle if he wants, but he's not really comfortable with castling and perhaps letting Magnus capture the pawn on b7 with this really strong bishop. And now he's down a pawn, and this bishop just has total control of this diagonal. So first, Duda plays this bishop to c6, protecting the pawn and challenging Magnus's bishop on this very important diagonal. And now Magnus just trades, captures the bishop, and we have rook captures on c6. And now Magnus makes another move that prevents Duda from castling, which is rook to d1, getting the rook on the open file, and of course attacking the queen. And it looks like the queen can capture back, but it can't because the knight is protecting the rook on d1. So we have queen to a5, getting the queen. The two queens are on the a and h file, which is a little bit interesting. You don't see that too often. And now Magnus plays bishop to g5, again really preventing Duda from castling, because here if Duda castles, then bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and queen takes pawn, and the g file is open, the queen is near the enemy king, and this would be just terrible for Duda. So Duda cannot castle here. Instead, he puts his own bishop on e7, getting ready to capture the knight if the bishop takes, and now he is threatening to castle. Here Magnus plays rook a to c1, getting his other rook on the other open file, and now has great control, great grip on these two open files. And here Duda plays not the best. I think I haven't checked, but castling here looks much better to me. Instead, he plays h6, which looks like it threatens the bishop, but it really doesn't. And we'll get into what that means in a moment. Magnus sees that this is not a real threat, and he ignores it and plays knight to e4, opening up an attack on the rook. This knight is now on a great central square. And what do I mean by, this isn't a real threat? Well, let's see what happens if pawn takes bishop. Then you just get queen takes rook on h8 with check, and Magnus is up the exchange and has this really threatening looking check. After the bishop blocks, knight takes on f6 with check, pawn takes, queen takes pawn, and now Magnus is up a rook and a pawn for a bishop, and Duda's king is stuck on e8, and it doesn't work. So, this h6 move, it's not really threatening the bishop. Magnus knows that. He puts his knight on a really important square. So Duda sort of ignores that for the moment. He takes on c1. Magnus captures back with a rook on c1. And now we have knight to e4 by Duda, forcing Magnus to make a decision. The knight is, now the bishop, well, maybe not, but the knight is now threatening to capture the bishop. The queen is also threatening to capture the knight because the knight is hanging on e4, but Magnus makes the correct move, which is taking the bishop on e7. Now the queen and the bishop are connected, and the bishop is preventing the king from castling kingside by obviously blocking the f8 square. But here Duda plays a really nice move that, to the untrained eye like mine, basically looks like he sort of puts a stamp on this game with queen to d2. And this is a great move because you can sort of see the idea. He's ignoring his knight, which is hanging on e4, but of course the queen can't take the knight because then queen takes rook with check, and Duda is up the exchange and has a tempo, so that doesn't work. So you're threatening to take the rook on c1, but you have these future ideas of the queen and the knight sort of teaming up on this f2 pawn and creating a really nice attack. So imagine your Magnus in this position and see if you can find the move of the year, the best move of 2023 so far, in my opinion. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so let's go through some moves that are not correct first. There's a couple of ideas that don't necessarily work. One of them is just trying to play it safe with the rook. So bringing the rook to f1, now the rook is protected, the rook is protecting f2, but this actually leads to a devastating attack by Duda. So you start with queen to e2. Queen takes the pawn, gets closer to the rook, closer to the enemy king, and now if you just sort of ignore this threat and play something silly like a3, then the knight comes to d2, and now you have the knight and the queen teaming up on this rook on f1, and this is not going to go so well. Here you have to get the queen into the game by bringing it to h4 with check. After the pawn blocks and the pawn is protected by the queen, you get queen to d1, protecting the rook, but now after queen takes rook, queen takes queen, knight takes rook. Now if the king captures, then Duda is just up a king, and that's great for Duda. So you can't ignore this threat of the queen on e2. The best move here is to put the bishop on b4, protecting the d2 square from the knight landing there, but Duda still has a trick up his sleeve. Here, he just plays knight to g5, and this is it looks like a slow move, but it has the really powerful threat of knight to e3, which forks the king and the queen, a royal fork, and you have to do something to stop this. The best way to stop it is f3, which doesn't defend the square with the knight, but it defends it with the rook, so now the knight cannot take because the rook will capture back. But here, Duda just takes with the queen on f3, and now after rook takes queen, now you get knight captures on f3, forking the king and the queen, and now Duda is just going to be up the exchange after pawn takes knight, and this is a winning endgame, of course, for Duda. So tucking the rook away on f1 doesn't work. You might be thinking of playing this rook to c8 move, and this is an idea that we're going to see in later lines. So you're obviously checking the king. And it looks like you might even be winning material because the king is forced to move to d7. But this doesn't work. If you take the rook on h8, then Duda actually has checkmate in just a couple of moves, which is pretty crazy to say. So the first rank has been abandoned. It's undefended. So you can play queen to e1 with check. King is forced to move to e2, but now queen takes f2, and this combo is super powerful and just causing all kinds of issues for Magnus. The king has only one move here to h3, and now queen to f1, forcing the king even further up the board, king to g4, and now queen to f5, and this is checkmate because all of these squares are sort of taken away either by the queen or by Magnus's pieces. So you cannot abandon the first rank for now. We might see differently in a couple of moves. So moves with the rook don't work. If you try to go to f1, that doesn't work. If you try to have any sort of rook lift, that doesn't work because you abandon the first rank. But hopefully you found, sorry I put you in suspense for so long, hopefully you found the move of the year, which is bishop to g5, just a crazy, crazy looking move. It achieves, the defensive idea is clear. You're attacking the queen and you're protecting the rook on c1. But of course, at the cost of sacrificing a bishop to 3 different pieces, right? This square is hotly contested by Duda's pieces. And so, you're achieving this defensive move, but at what cost? So let's go through and, it's really impressive that Magnus found this in a rapid game nonetheless. Let's go through and see what happens if you sort of capture with all the pieces. So if pawn captures, we get into the same idea with what we saw before. Queen captures on h8 with check, and after the king moves, queen to c8. And now the queen is teaming up with the rook, and this is totally fine for Magnus. We can have queen takes on e2, now threatening this f2 square, and the same sort of checkmate idea that we saw before. But it doesn't work because queen takes on b7 with check, and after the king moves, queen takes on a7, protecting this pawn on f2. So basically, you can't take the bishop with the pawn, which sort of makes sense. We saw that earlier. But what about queen takes bishop? So queen takes bishop, and now you're sort of encouraging a queen trade. Now, actually, Magnus can trade the queens. But now, of course, because the queen's off the board, this rook to c8 move does work. The rook checks the king runs up the board, rook takes rook, and now Magnus is just up the exchange in an endgame, which is entirely winning. So Duda's really only option here. Oh, I should also say, can you ignore this bishop? Can you just move the queen to safety? Let's say we go queen to e2. This doesn't work either because now you get bishop to e3, and now this bishop is a super powerful defensive piece. It's obviously protecting f2. The first rank is protected, so we don't have queen to f1 check, or sorry, even queen to e1 check is what I meant. And now you're in trouble. If you take, the best move here is to take with the knight on f2, but after bishop takes and castles, now Magnus is just up a piece. And, this might look like a weird move, knight takes on f2, but this knight is hanging to the queen, so you have to do something with it. It doesn't work to, retreat the knight to, d6, because then you get queen to d4, attacking the knight, attacking this pawn, attacking this pawn. The rook is coming here, and the position is going to fall apart very quickly for Duda. So it doesn't work to bring the queen to e2 and try to, attack this f2 pawn because of this bishop, which now becomes a monster defensive piece. So the only thing that Duda can really do here, we saw he couldn't take with the pawn, he couldn't take with the queen, he can't really move the queen away. The best move here is what Duda played, which is knight takes on g5, and now you're maintaining the pressure of the queen potentially taking the rook on c1. But now you have this rook to c8 check, and now this move is going to work, and we'll see why. After the king moves, you get rook takes, and now you don't necessarily have this queen check because after, wait, what do I want to show here? Yeah, because after king to g2, there's no more checks that work. The knight is not on as useful a square. The queen can't get at the king and sort of create the same mating net. So there's no checkmate because of the sort of the sacrifices here that Magnus made to get this knight off of the e4 square, and now the knight can't team up with the queen in attacking the king. So the other issue is that you can't play this knight to f3. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, you can't play this knight to f3 check for a couple reasons. The pawn is defending it, but obviously just now the queen is also pinning the knight to the king. So that was sort of a long-winded way of saying now this works. The rook can take the rook. This queen and knight no longer have an attack going, and now Magnus is just up the exchange in an endgame. So here we have queen takes on e2, but now Magnus just brings his queen into the game with queen to b4, checking the king, and now the position is slowly going to fall apart for Duda. We have king to f6, improving the position of the king, but now queen to f4, just getting the queen, right in the center of the action. King moves to g6, and now Magnus brings his own king to g2, getting rid of any first rank checks. e5 by Duda, attacking the queen. Queen to e3, happily offering a queen trade because Magnus is up material. Duda, of course, declines. And Magnus plays h4, kicking the knight. The knight moves to e6. Magnus, instead of taking the pawn, which is defended by Duda's queen, just plays e4. We have king to f6, and now rook to e7, blocking off the king's escape on the e file. Queen to b5 attacks the rook. Let me see when Duda resigned, actually. Sorry. Okay. Did he? No, not yet. Okay. Now the rook comes to b8, attacking this pawn on b7 with both the queen and the rook. We have knight to c5, defending the pawn and attacking the queen at the same time, but queen to d5, which actually pins the knight to the queen, because now if the knight moves, Magnus just picks up Duda's queen. So a6 protects the queen, but now Magnus plays rook to f8, and in this position, Duda resigned the game, because now you're just, the position is about to fall apart, and you're going to lose a bunch of material. The queen and the rook are eyeing this f8 pawn. The best move here is c6, offering up a queen trade, but of course rook takes on f8, king moves away, and now queen check, pawn takes, and now you're just up a rook, and you are technically down a pawn, but this rook is going to have no trouble capturing all of these pawns, which are not connected, and Magnus will have no problem winning this endgame. So yeah, so an awesome game. You know, maybe not the best game overall, but I think we can just go back to the move. An incredible move here by Magnus to put the bishop on g5, to just sacrifice it 3 different ways, and find a way to win in a rapid game against a very high level player. So hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Drop a like, drop a subscribe, and we'll see you next time.